We're going to do completing the square. This is section 5.5. We did an introduction last week, and now we're going to do the completing the square. All right, let's get started. All right, let's talk about what we did last week, and then we're going to take it one step forward after that. We can't always solve by factoring. You guys have been solving by factoring, and you've been solving by taking the square root of both sides, and we can't always do that. We have to do something else. And so we've got to find something that works. And so somebody came up with this. You guys have been doing this. Number 1 and number 2, you've been doing this already. There's 2 steps to this, though. It says find the value that completes the square. That's the C value you've been finding. Then it says, and then rewrite as a perfect square. So we're going to do what we did last week and then take it one step further. So you're going to take the half of the 8 and square it. 8 over 2 is 4, and 4 squared is 16. So what goes here is a 16. Are you with me so far?
Yes.
And then the reason we did this was because we transformed this into a perfect square trinomial. Or actually, this is a perfect square trinomial, and now I want the perfect square that this is. I want the perfect square that this is. So it's x plus 4. Where we got that 4 is we take the 16 and we take the square root, or we take half of the 8 and stick it there. Both of those work. It must work for both, or you didn't find the right one. They want you to fill in the blanks so that you make a perfect square trinomial. That's what the first thing says. Find the value that completes the square, and here's the and write it as a perfect square. They want the 16 and this perfect square. So let's do number 2. How do I fill in the blank? What do I do to fill in the blank?
You're just going to put a 20 there.
You're going to have 40?
Half of 40, which is?
20.
20.
And 20 squared is?
Negative 20, y'all.
Negative. Okay, negative. It doesn't really matter because we're squaring it.
It doesn't matter for this, but it will for the perfect square.
Yes, it will. So half of 40 is 20, and 20 squared is?
400.
400.
I had to put that on my calculator.
That's the first step they want us to do. And the second step, they want us to find the perfect square. I know it's an M. Is it a minus or a plus? It's a minus because this minus right here tells us that we have a minus. And then what goes there? I want to go back to the previous one. The previous one, we had the 16. We take the square root and we get that one. Or we half this and it goes there. Both of them work. So we take half the 40 is 20. Does it work for the square root of 400?
Yes.
Yes. This is the answer they want. They want the fill in the blank 400, and they want the m minus 20 squared.
M? What about x?
In this case, we had an x on this one because the variable is x. Over here, we have an m because of the variable they gave us was an m. Are there any questions? All right. That is another step towards completing the square, okay? Last week, you learned how to find the fill in the blank. Then we do this little step. And then we're going to go the full completing the square in a moment. But I want you to be clear on how we got this part first. All right, when we do number 5, we're going to take half of the 13 and square it. It's going to be a fraction because 13 doesn't go in. 2 doesn't go into 13. So what we're going to do is we're just going to square the 13 and square the 2. So we'll have this. When we square the 13, we'll get 169. And when we square the 2, we'll get 4. So we have found the part that we fill in the blank. It's a fraction. It's not beautiful, but we found it. Now we need to find the perfect square. We have our y value that goes there. And we take the square root of that one that goes there. The square root is what we started off with inside that parentheses, which is 13 over 2. And it's a negative because of that value right there. We're finished with number 5. Let's do number 6 now. Let's do number 6. Number 6 it's the negative 15 over 2.
225 over 4.
And we square the 15, that's 225 or 125?
225.
225 over 4.
Okay, that's not bad.
And then they want you to fill in the blank, but then they want us to do the x. Is it minus or plus?
Minus.
It's minus. And then what goes in the blank here? 15 over 2 and then squared. All right, we ready to go on? Any questions?
Sure, let's go.
Okay, let's go. All right, now let's do some actual solving. Solving means we're going to solve for the value of x. We're going to use the completing the square, but we're going to solve for x. This might be able to be factored, but it might not be able to be factored. I'm not even going to check it right now because the instructions tell us to complete the square. We've been solving by factoring. We've been solving by taking the square to both sides. We can't take the square to both of those. We could factor that, but we're going to do this by completing the square. So what we have to do first is we need to get that blank. Remember you used to have a blank over there? We have these two that are there in the right spot, but we need that 7 to go to the other side, so we have that blank that you're used to finding, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to add the 7 to the other side, and we'll have x squared plus 6x, leave a blank, and make it equal to 7. Are you with me so far? You're used to having that blank to fill in, and we have to make it there. So how do we get 9?
We divided that by 2, and then we got a 3, and then we squared
Yes,
the 3.
so we took that 6. I'm going to go over here. We took the 6 over 2, and then we squared it, correct? And that became 9. So we're going to add 9. The rules of equations state that if I add something to one side of an equation, what do I need to do?
Add it to the other.
Add it to the other. So we have to add a 9 over here.
So 16.
Yes. I have created a perfect
Can you just add
square
the 7
over
plus
here.
9?
We will. But I'll bring it down as a 16. Yes. I have created a perfect square right here. So I'm going to write it as such. I'm going to write it as x plus something squared. And I'm going for Isaac, I'm going to write that 16 right here. What goes in the blank?
3.
I heard a 3 because it's half of the 6 or it's the square root of the 9, right? So it's a 3. Are you with me so far?
Yep.
Is that the end? Is that
We're not done. Remember, it says to solve, and whenever we're solved, we have to have an x equals some stuff.
Yeah.
Okay? So we're not finished because we don't have x equals some stuff yet. So this is where we kind of would have stopped at your previous ones when I was taking you step by small step. Now we're going to complete it and finish. I have something squared on this side, and I could be something squared on that side. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. When I square root something squared, what happens?
It cancels?
It cancels, and I'm just left with x plus 3. When I square root something with a number on both sides, what things do I absolutely have to make sure I write down?
Oh, plus or minus.
Plus or minus. What is the square root of 16?
4.
4.
Plus or minus 4.
Exactly right. Plus or minus 4. I am supposed to have x equals something. So I'm going to move the 3 over
1.
by subtracting 3 from
x
both
equals
sides.
1.
Now,
So x equals
just a second.
1, 7.
Yes, I've got a positive 4 minus 3 and a negative 4 minus 3.
Negative 1, comma 7.
So if I have a 4 minus 3, what do I have?
1.
1.
Oh.
If I have a negative 4 minus
It's
3,
gonna be -7.
negative 7. You could write these in any order. These are not ordered pairs. This is not an ordered pair.
So would we circle what x equals?
Yes, you circle what x equals and you're finished.
Lovely.
That's a long way to do it.
Fun, guys.
Okay?
All right.
Completing the square has a lot of steps, but because I walked you slowly last week through one of them, then this morning and this afternoon just a little bit another one, then each one of them, they're not hard, they're just long. And so now we've got all the little steps to put together.
So if it was a fraction, we just do the same thing.
Yes. Let's do some more.
Yes, please.
Let's do number 11. On number 11, we have to do like we did on number 9. We need to move over the 6 to the other side so we can create that blank. So we have an x squared minus 13x. We're going to leave the blank and bring the 6 over by adding. We're going to take that half of that 13, square it, This cannot be reduced. It's going to stay a fraction. That's not a problem. We'll just add that squared, and which is going to be 169 over 4. We're going to do it to both sides. This becomes a perfect square trinomial. So we're going to write it as such. We'll have our x minus, we take half of that, or the square root of that. Then, this part we need to add together. Don't stress about this. This part's the one that stresses a lot of students because it's got that big old ugly fraction. But don't worry about it. You have a device in front of you that can do that, or you can find a common denominator. Don't let that stress you, but your calculator can do that for you. When you put that in your calculator, you're going to get 193 over 4. We're going to take the square root of both sides. Remember that on this side, the square and the square root cancel. We'll be left with x minus 13 over 2. And then plus or minus on this side. I want you to check on your calculator and see if the 193 actually has a square root. If it does, we'll bring it out. If it doesn't, then we won't. It does not have a square root. For the sake of time, I'm going to tell you that it also cannot be put into the factor tree and pulled some stuff out. It's just the square root of 193. But the 4 has a perfect square root. So we're going to take the 4 out and make it the square root. It's 2 right there. We're now going to move this 13 over. Let me get a little bit of room here. We're starting to run out of space. We're going to move over that 13 over 2 by adding. So we're going to go x equals, I'm going to put the 13 over 2 in front, but I'm going to, since they have a common denominator, they're going to be nicely put together. So I'm going to just leave the 13 with a plus or minus, the square root of 193, and since they have the same denominator, we only have to write it once. And we have the answer. It looks large and kind of chunky, but it's not a problem. It is the answer. Let's move on now to number 13. Number 13, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to have to move this 4 right here. We need to divide the 4 by everything. When we do that, we're going to be left with an r squared plus, this reduces to 3 over 2. This does not reduce. And this stays 0. We're going to move that to the other side, so we have our blank. R squared minus 3 over 2r. Leave our blank. Positive 55 over 4. No problem so far. We're going to take half of that. Uh-oh. I know that there are some of you that are really worrying about this. When we take half of a fraction, all we do is double the denominator. So because that's the same as 3 over 2 times a half, and those denominators just double, okay? So that's really going to be 3 over 4 squared, which is going to be 9 over 16. This is a perfect square trinomial. So we have r squared minus half of that, or the square root of that, should be the same one. Remember, half of this is just the denominator doubled. We don't need our squared there because it goes here. And this can go into our graphing calculator. And we can make it turn into a fraction. That will be, once you put it into your calculator, 229 over 16. I'm running out of space.
So let's reduce some of this. Let's take the square root of both sides. We're going to have r minus 3 over 4 equals plus or minus this. Check and see if that's a perfect square root. Put it into your calculator, take the square root and see if it comes out as a decimal or not. It will come out as a decimal, so we're going to leave it square root of 229. But the 16 does come out. It comes out as a 4. Notice again we have the same common denominator. We're going to bring that 3 over 4 over here by adding, and we will get r equals 3/4, or 3, since they have a common denominator, plus or minus square root 229 all over 4. Let's move on to number 15. Number 15. We're going to have to do that 10. But if you notice, if I move the 77 over, that's going to be an 80 when I add the 77. So if it's an 80 and I divide by 10, it will come out evenly. So let's do that first. Let's move that over to create our blank. 10r squared minus 20r equals 80. We have to divide by that 10. And everything goes into that. 10 goes into everything. So that's beautiful. We'll have r squared minus 2r equals 8. And just for space, I'm going to move some stuff around. You leave it on your paper, but I am going to clear some space here so we have some room. So we take half of the 2 and square it. It's going to be 1. And we add 1 to both sides. This is a perfect square trinomial, so we're going to turn it into the perfect square. We take half of the 2 and put it there, or a square root of the 1 and put it there, and we'll get 1. 8 plus 1 is 9. Take the square root of both sides. This just becomes r plus 1, and this becomes plus or minus 3. We're going to move the 1 over there by subtracting. So we'll have positive 3 minus 1 is 2, and negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. We have 2 answers. Those are nice and pretty compared to those big chunky ones that we had before. All right, let's review what we've done. We must use completing the square to solve. The reason we need to learn how to do this is because factoring doesn't always work. We need to have another method. One thing of information that you need to know is that completing the square will work on all quadratics. You don't even have to check. It will just always work. I hope this has been helpful. Goodbye.